With a single headline, the U.S. immigration debate shifted overnight. Trump plans to lock up 100,000 migrants at once.
All illegal entry will immediately be halted, and we will begin the process of returning millions and millions of criminal aliens back to the places from which they came.
Well, the federal government says that this is a more tax-effective way of detaining these people, and that it gives them the flexibility to move people around.
Across the Southwest, barbed wire went up, floodlights came on, and massive compounds capable of holding tens of thousands of people were rising from the ground.
But in January 2025, all 20 of the top centers were managed by private companies.
What used to be discrete detention centers hidden in border towns are being transformed into mega prisons, so vast that critics say they mark the birth of an entirely new immigration machine. Federal officials call it efficient, opponents call it intimidation on an industrial scale. And with ICE already testing these facilities in Texas and Arizona, the question is no longer if Trump's plan can happen, it's how far it will go and who gets caught up in it. Behind the numbers, 100,000 detainees and billions in contracts are families and children about to be torn apart. And this is only the beginning. The first signs appeared along the Texas border. Locals noticed trucks hauling steel beams down deserted highways, entire fields cleared overnight. By morning, skeletal frames of massive structures stood in the desert, fences went up, watchtowers pierced the skyline. This wasn't an oil project, it was the prototype for ICE's Mega-Detention initiative, what could be the largest immigration facility in U.S. history. Officials framed it as an expansion of existing facilities to meet unprecedented demand. In plain language, America was running out of space to hold migrants. The solution wasn't more jails, it was bigger ones. Imagine stadiums refitted as prisons, dormitories the length of football fields, cafeterias built to feed thousands in a single sitting. These weren't temporary shelters, they were permanent compounds built for mass intake. By 2024, several were already operational. One outside Dilley, Texas, could hold more than 20,000 people. Another in Arizona was rumored to be doubling in size. Together, they signaled something new, the industrialization of immigration detention. Leaked accounts painted a grim picture: overcrowded dorms, children separated from parents, detainees waiting weeks before even speaking to a lawyer. ICE called them efficient holding centers. Critics compared them to internment camps. And as these concrete fortresses kept rising, one question echoed louder: if the prisons were already built, what did Trump plan to fill them with? For years, Donald Trump railed against what he called the catch-and-release disaster. But in 2025, his immigration pledge escalated into something no administration had ever attempted before: a plan to detain more than 100,000 migrants at once.
Today, I will sign a series of historic executive orders. With these actions, we will begin the complete restoration of America and the revolution of common sense. It's all about common sense.
He argued that only by locking up everyone, men, women, and children, with no immediate release, could the U.S. finally send a strong message to those attempting to cross the border: don't even try. However, behind the sound bites, the logistics were staggering. Federal memos revealed plans to mobilize fleets of buses and aircraft. ICE would no longer rely on scattered county jails. Instead, entire convoys would funnel migrants straight into megacenters, processed in bulk, and held until deportation flights were ready. Supporters said the scale was the point. To them, filling those centers to capacity was a visual show of control, a televised warning to anyone still considering the journey north. While critics countered that the math didn't work, feeding, housing, and guarding 100,000 people at once would cost billions. But inside ICE meetings, officials floated an even bolder idea: staging mass transfers for the cameras, bus convoys, helicopters overhead, videos blasted across global media, a made-for-TV show of enforcement. And that's when the unease spread, because if Trump's promise became reality, it wasn't just a matter of immigration. It raised questions no press release could answer. How long could children be kept behind razor wire? Who decides which families are split apart? And once the standard is 100,000 detainees, where does it stop? From the outside, these compounds look like fortresses: steel gates, towers, endless fencing. But step inside and the numbers turn into faces. One facility in Dilley, Texas, was already at near capacity when buses rolled through the gates overnight, mothers stripped of the children and belongings as guards herded them into intake lines. Guards ordered them to remove shoelaces, belts, even hair ties. Anything that could be seen as a threat was taken off. In cavernous dorms, rows of bunk beds stretched wall to wall. In one wing, more than 100 children lay awake on thin mattresses, staring at humming fluorescent bulbs, while their parents were locked in a separate building just yards away. Leaked accounts describe detainees waiting days for clean clothes and weeks to see a lawyer. Lawsuits reveal complaints of spoiled food, contaminated water, and infants losing weight from untreated illness. Workers whispered about impossible workloads. Nurses forced to clear dozens of patients an hour, often with nothing ibuprofen. Case managers buried under caseloads of hundreds of detainees each, with no time for individual review. For migrants, the uncertainty was crushing. Some had fled cartel violence, some political crackdowns, while others were grinding poverty. After weeks of dangerous travel, they found themselves caged indefinitely, unsure if tomorrow meant freedom or deportation. Critics call this the hidden cost of the 100,000 plan. Behind every statistic is a broken family, a stolen childhood, and for those already trapped inside, the message was clear. They weren't just detainees, they were the warning. For Trump, the mega-detention centers were never just about border policy. They were political fuel. At rallies, his promise to lock up 100,000 migrants electrified crowds. To his base, it was proof that Trump delivered where others had only talked.
We will reinstate my Remain in Mexico policy.
But in Washington, the backlash was immediate. Democrats called the centers unconstitutional internment camps. Civil rights groups compared them to America's darkest chapters. Even some Republicans quietly admitted the images of children behind barbed wire would be impossible to defend on the world stage. However, Trump's advisors saw the opportunity. Every headline about mass raids, every clip of detainee buses, every lawsuit against ICE was spun into proof of strength. They framed the suffering not as scandal, but as political theater, evidence that Trump was serious about enforcement, and the timing was no coincidence. With elections looming, immigration once again became the centerpiece of his campaign. His ads featured convoys of buses and drone footage of detention centers, branded as solution. To opponents, it was cruelty on display. To supporters, control was finally restored. Outside the Beltway, protests erupted in sanctuary cities. Faith leaders condemned the policy. Lawyers filed emergency injunctions. Activists held vigils outside compounds, chanting the names of detainees. But the louder the opposition grew, the more defiant Trump's allies became. They accused critics of siding with illegals over American citizens. Conservative media pushed the idea that the mega centers were not only justified but overdue, that anyone who opposed them wanted open borders. And in the middle stood the lawmakers, some torn between outrage in their districts and loyalty to their party. And as the numbers increased, one thing became clear. The plan wasn't just testing the limits of immigration enforcement, it was testing the limits of American democracy itself. On paper, the idea of locking up 100,000 migrants at once looked bold, but in practice, it looked impossible. Trump's administration awarded a contract worth up to $1.2 billion to build and operate what it says will become the nation's largest immigration detention complex. But even the largest facilities designed to hold tens of thousands in Texas already buckled under the strain. Plumbing failures, food shortages, and medical staff stretched thin. Multiply that across 5 or 6 mega centers, and the cracks begin to show fast. Leaked memos revealed ICE spending millions each week just on transport, fleets of buses, chartered planes, fuel, and private contractors to shuffle detainees between facilities. Housing and feeding detainees added billions more, and still, beds were running out. Then came the legal chaos. By law, every detainee is entitled to due process. But how do you process 100,000 asylum claims at once? Court dockets already backlogged for years collapsed under the new wave. Judges stacked hearings by the hundreds each day, some lasting mere minutes. Former immigration judge John Richardson described the outcome of the quotas as a law enforcement assembly line. Civil rights attorneys filed injunctions, arguing migrants were being unlawfully held without access to counsel, children being denied protections guaranteed by the Flores settlement, and families were being illegally separated. Meanwhile, medical professionals raised alarms about outbreaks inside the mega centers. Overcrowding, poor ventilation, and limited sanitation turned facilities into tinderboxes for disease.
One of our minor clients who was just released with his mother from the Dilley Detention Facility late last week had a chronic ear infection that went untreated despite the mother's consistent request for treatment for her son who was suffering while in detention.
Reports of untreated fevers and respiratory infections spread, with whistleblowers claiming detainees were dying in custody while awaiting care. ICE agents began to voice concerns, describing morale collapsing as they were ordered to work double shifts in sweltering heat, fearing both protests outside and burnout inside. And hanging over it all was the price tag. Independent audits projected billions in new federal spending, funds siphoned from emergency budgets and defense contracts. Trump's allies brushed it off, saying the chaos was proof the system needed breaking before it could be rebuilt. But legal scholars warned of something darker, that pushing detention to this scale set a precedent no future administration could easily roll back. Which raised the most dangerous question yet: what happens when 100,000 detainees becomes the new normal? When news broke that ICE was preparing to detain 100,000 people at once, the shock rippled far beyond border towns. This wasn't just about immigration, it was about America itself. Civil liberties experts warned that normalizing mass detention could erode the foundation of democracy. If the government could justify holding tens of thousands without trial, what would stop it from extending those powers elsewhere? Some compared it to the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. Back then, fear was the justification. Today, it's border security. But the outcome looks strangely similar. Entire communities painted with a broad brush and stripped of their rights. Internationally, the fallout was immediate. Human rights groups condemned the mega centers as industrialized cruelty. Allies who once partnered with Washington on refugee resettlement began questioning whether America had abandoned its role as a defender of human rights. But the images of children in confinement circulated worldwide as symbols of a superpower in decline. At home, the divide hardened. For Trump's base, the centers were a victory lap, a symbol that promises were being kept no matter the outrage. For his critics, they were evidence that America was sliding toward authoritarianism under the banner of immigration enforcement, and the ripple effects reached daily life. Communities went silent. Parents pulled children from schools, crime went unreported, and undocumented workers vanished from farms, restaurants, and construction sites overnight. Economists warned of shortages and higher costs in industries built on migrant labor. Even law enforcement felt the strain. Was militarizing immigration policy making America safer, or was it draining billions from other threats like cybercrime, terrorism, and violent gangs that remained underfunded? The deeper issue was precedent. Once you build cages big enough for 100,000 people, you create a template for power that future leaders could use again. As one analyst put it, this was never just about migrants. It was a test of how much freedom Americans are willing to trade for the promise of control, which leaves us with a haunting possibility. If the government can build cages large enough for over 100,000 migrants today, who else might it try to contain tomorrow? And so, the rise of America's mega-detention centers is not just a policy shift, it's a turning point, because behind the fences and razor wire are shattered families, silenced communities, and a democracy straining under its own weight. ICE calls it efficiency, Trump calls it strength, but history may remember it as something far darker, because this isn't just about 100,000 detainees. It's about the moment America chose what kind of nation it truly wants to be. And the most unsettling question remains: if this is only the beginning, what comes next? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and check out the videos now on your screen for more deep dives, because the real consequences of America's detention plan haven't even begun to surface.